Welcome to the Don't Tread on Anyone podcast and the Libertarian Institute. Today, I am joined by candidate for Senate in Arizona, Marc Victor. Mr. Victor, where is the best place for people to find your platform and where you stand on the issues?
Well, they can always go to liveandletliverevolution.com. This is currently where we've parked my website for U.S. Senate, but eventually we will likely put other candidates there as well. As you know, I'm standing to advocate for a really a different worldview than what we've had thus far. We call it the live and let live worldview. That's what I'm going to be talking about as to all issues. And if people are interested in finding about live and let live, they should just go to liveandletlive.org.
I will be asking Mr. Victor more or less the same questions I asked Blake Masters. The goal is to give the same questions to the candidates and see how they answer them. Mr. Victor, starting off, the government is justified in mandating lockdowns and vaccine mandates to stop the spread of a deadly virus. How do you respond?
Well, the government should not be initiating force against anybody who has private property. And so what I would say here is that the private property owners should make decisions under what conditions somebody can enter their private property. So I don't take any position in terms of what rules private property owners may select. So if it doesn't have to be declared a pandemic or an endemic, or anything else. I mean, private property owners want to say you got to wear a mask to come into my private property for any reason at all, then the private property owner has a right to make such a rule. But they can make rules on all kinds of things. They can say, look, if you wear a red shirt, you can't come into my business. I think that's perfectly fine as well. Some businesses make rules that say no guns allowed. Every once in a while, someone in the gun community comes to talk to me about that and says, Mark, I got a Second Amendment right, and they're telling me I can't bring my gun in this store. And I always say, is it a private property store? And they say yes. And I say, well, the Second Amendment doesn't apply, just like the First Amendment doesn't apply, right? These things restrain government. So really the issue in terms of private property is very easily resolved. The private property owner makes the rule, and then people who would want to enter that private property decide whether or not they want to comply with that rule to enter. The question on government property is different. The government has certain restrictions in terms of what they can do. Like, for example, in a private property situation, I can say, you can't say anything bad about the president of the United States, and that's perfectly fine. If the government says that, that violates the First Amendment. So in terms of what rules the government can make, these should be subject to the ordinary rules of strict scrutiny and minimum scrutiny. I certainly favor strict scrutiny for everything that the government does to impinge on liberty. So this would be a question of whether you got a real contagious situation and what the government wants to make for rules in terms of entering government property, right? But in an ideal situation, I would like to dramatically reduce the amount of government property in the first place, as that solves virtually this entire problem.
What metric can we use to determine whether or not tyranny exists in America?
Well, the issue to me isn't whether tyranny exists in America. The issue for me is whether aggression exists in America. What we're against in the Live and Let Live movement is aggression. And nobody should get to aggress on another person. What I mean by aggression here is an initiation of force against another person or their property, or any fraud or any coercion or anything that puts another person or their property in a risk of serious danger. So that should always be against the law. It should be against the law for any individual to do any such thing, any group of individuals to do any such thing, any corporation to do any such thing, or the government. So whatever you want to call it, tyranny or terrorism or whatever, I don't care what you call it. If it fits into that aggression box, it should be against the law at all times. And when somebody makes an allegation that another person or group has aggressed, they should get a scrupulously fair trial. But if it turns out that the person or group or organization actually aggressed, well, then we should do something about it. That's what we have jails and prisons for, and fines and probation and all that. So we in the Live and Let Live movement are against all acts of aggression, no matter who's perpetrating them.
One of the major things that is on television, radio, discussed by professors is this divide in America. It's usually men versus women, or black versus white, or rich versus poor. It seems a lot of these are arbitrary, either based on accident of birth or nothing in principle. Do you have a principle by which we could actually divide people based on something that's meaningful?
Well, yes, I would say that the one divider that actually makes sense is whether one supports aggression or rejects aggression. That's really the key issue here. And the people in the Live and Let Live movement, the ones who I come from, we're against aggression. I actually see the world dividing up into two major groups: aggressors and non-aggressors. I think there are more non-aggressors, people who think aggression is wrong. What we need to do in terms of getting the world organized is to make that message clear and simple, and get the people who are actually against aggression to get together. We'd like to unify them under the banner of Live and Let Live, which opposes all forms of aggression. Now, just because somebody doesn't aggress doesn't mean they're doing things we think are okay, right? They may still be doing things that we find to be immoral or unhealthy or unwise. That's why in the Live and Let Live movement, we have what we call a moral principle. And we describe that with the phrase, just be a good human. So we're encouraging people to, what you might say, be virtuous, right? You can't pass a law and force people to be virtuous. We don't think people should be forced to do anything other than just not be an aggressor. But we're promoting and inspiring people to be open-minded towards other people, tolerant of other people, to be voluntarily kind, civilized towards other people. We want them to build high levels of trust with other humans. And we should value things like truth and facts and rational thought. The reason for this is because what we want to do in this space is to really optimize human happiness and well-being and minimize suffering. So while people are free to act in ways we disagree with, so long as they're not being aggressive, that doesn't mean we have to think it's okay, right? We can speak out against that. We can try to inspire them to act in different ways. In fact, somebody who doesn't aggress isn't necessarily a good fit for the Live and Let Live movement. Somebody who doesn't aggress and who agrees with our moral principle, this idea of being a good human, that's somebody we want to attract into the Live and Let Live movement. That's what it is I'm pushing, and am pushing as a candidate for United States Senate, and will push as a United States Senator. In fact, will push to the extent I have any influence in any area of the world for the rest of my life.
What is the worst law in Arizona that you think should be repealed?
Any law that allows another person or group to aggress against others is a bad law. So in other words, all laws should be in harmony with this idea that we shouldn't aggress. There are many different laws that I would look at and attack. For example, the entire category of laws that seeks to impose morality and moral decisions on other people, and even ones that I agree with. Like, for example, I said earlier that people should be open-minded and tolerant and kind. If that was imported into the law, I would be against it. I think people have every right in a free society to be closed-minded, intolerant, uncivilized, unkind towards other people. While we certainly do everything we can do to discourage that, people have a right to act any way they want to act and should be left alone. And I would defend their rights to be left alone so long as they don't violate the one rule we care about, which is don't be an aggressor. So I would say all laws. So for example, in the criminal justice system, where I've worked for the last 28 years, I would say the entire category of victimless crimes, right? These are laws against competent adults putting whatever drug they choose into their body. These are laws against prostitution, laws against gambling, laws that prohibit guns to be in the hands of competent, responsible adults that are not presenting any risk of harm to other people. Some examples are like, well, the barrel of the weapon is a little too short, or a silencer or something like that. These aren't things that create substantial risks to other people. So those types of laws are all wrong, even though like, for example, I may personally take a position against, say, for example, gambling. I may say, Keith, I don't think you should gamble. I don't gamble. It's a bad idea. You can lose your money. Notwithstanding such a personal position, I would advocate for the rights of other competent adults to do whatever they want to do with their money, especially in a case where I don't approve with what they're doing. That's the nature of freedom. I'm not trying to impose my personal judgments on other people.
I want to get your response to this concept. The masses in every nation are, by every metric, rationally ignorant about politics. We need less people voting, not more. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I'm not an advocate for voting or not voting. I don't really care, frankly. What I care about is that the laws that mandate what people do all be consistent with what we're calling our legal principles. So, for example, if I knew that only 10% of the people agree with me that we should outlaw aggression and only outlaw aggression, then I would only want those 10% of the people voting. I think we need to get to the right rules. How we get to them isn't as big a consideration. I think if we're going to have voting, then we should do it in a fair way with due process where the votes are counted and we don't have fraud, and all of that is very important. But I think that the problems that we have in society really are two main varieties. Number one, our laws are not limited to the don't be an aggressor legal principle. And number two, we don't do enough to advocate, to persuade, to inspire our fellow brother and sister human beings to act in accordance with the moral principle of be a good human. Those are the 2 points I really want to get across.
Antonin Scalia once said, the transformation of charity into legal entitlement has produced donors without love and recipients without gratitude. What are your thoughts on this idea of the welfare state?
Well, of course, I couldn't agree more with that statement. And to be clear, I don't agree with everything Justice Scalia ever said. He said some good things and some bad things. This is one I completely agree with. Look, forced charity is not charity at all. I certainly, to be clear, agree that there are people less fortunate in the world. This is obvious. We should help them. I strongly advocate for people to help them. What I don't want to do is put my personal positions about charity into the law and force everybody else to comply with them for many reasons. For starters, I'm in charge of my money. I'm not in charge of your money, so I don't get to tell you what to do with your money. But you may have other ideas about how you want to be charitable or not. There are many causes in the world, and it's not for me or anybody else to rank them to decide which charities are more important than others and in what amounts people should be forced to pay. We want to inspire people to be charitable, not force them to be charitable.
I would really like to see you on the Senate floor. I think that would be an absolute blast. One of the questions that comes up is this concept of a deep state in Washington. So let's say we get our favorite people elected. Who really calls the shots? My general reasoning is we know that Joe Biden does not run his Twitter account. He also has a number of speechwriters. He is referring to his notes in a press conference for question and answer. He goes, well, I got a list here. Let me see who I need to call on. He doesn't write the laws. He just signs them after they've already been written. Who is really calling the shots in Washington? Do you have any idea?
I don't have any personal insights about who's calling the shots in Washington. Frankly, I don't really care who's calling the shots in Washington. What I care about is what shots they're calling and how they're calling those shots. That's what's important to me. These are questions I think that get resolved when enough people join a movement and their hearts and minds are really in the movement, this is how you get change done, right? Merely electing somebody to office or some fancy slogan or something like that, this isn't going to get done what we need to get done. We need a revolution. We need a different worldview. That's what we're pitching here. What we're pitching in the Live and Let Live movement is a different worldview, one that starts analyzing all issues exactly the same way. Question number one, is the legal principle violated? If it is, it should be illegal. We should stop it immediately. If it's not, then whatever conduct is going on should be legal. Question number, and we should defend the rights of the person to continue to engage in that conduct. But then question number two, is the moral principle being violated? Is this be a good human being violated? If it is, well, then we should do our best to try to convince the people to not engage in that conduct, even though we defend their legal right to engage in it. Now, if the moral principle is not being violated, then fantastic. Everybody should have a great time. There's no problem whatsoever. People may still be against it because they have higher moral views, but that's fine. At this point, what we've achieved is freedom and peace, and that's actually the goal. So to just sum up this question, what we need to do, just like what was done in all other revolutions, right, in all other major movements, we have to win enough people, their hearts and minds, to join the Live and Let Live movement. When that happens, I don't care who's calling the shots right now, we'll be calling the shots. And until that happens, we're going to suffer at the hands of whoever's calling the shots for whatever shots they're calling. And this every 4 years, having a new person in there trying to impose their moral views on everybody else, I think we can all see this doesn't work out so well.
A lot of people I speak with think that when you say the word aggression, you are talking about someone who is very assertive, or someone who kind of is argumentative, or someone who kind of causes a lot of problems. When you say aggression, what do you mean?
Yeah, we try to be very clear on this point because, of course, there are people in the world who, consider aggression being offended by what somebody else said. So we try to be very clear on this point. And in the Live and Let Live movement, we do define this down very specifically. We say aggression is the initiation of force against another person or their property. It's also fraud or coercion. And I'll say this in a lawyerly kind of a way. It's doing anything that creates a substantial risk of harm or a substantial threat of harm to another person or their property. We're also very clear at making the point that offensive words are never aggression by themselves, right? Offensive words are merely free speech. So I don't care how offended somebody is by something somebody else said. While I may discourage such a person from saying such a thing, it's certainly not aggression. And if it's not aggression, then if you want a free society, you've got to stand up and defend the rights of other people to say and do things that we find offensive.
Thomas Sowell wrote a book, Basic Economics. In it, he says, most of the great fortunes in American history have resulted from someone's figuring out how to reduce cost so as to be able to charge lower prices and therefore gain a mass market for the product. Henry Ford did this with automobiles, Rockefeller with oil, Carnegie with steel, Sears, Penny, Walton, and other department store chains, founders with a variety of products. And today we have books with Amazon as well. How do we take this lesson, harness it, and apply it to the medical field so we can have affordable healthcare and not this fascist regime we currently have now with high prices?
Well, all we have to do is just repel the notion that it's okay to aggress against people, because what will result if we take aggression out of the law, what will result is people being free to trade goods and services without the restraints of aggression upon them. So what I think Thomas Sowell was getting at here is people innovating in a free market to deliver goods and services, the best goods and services at the best price according to what the market wants. This you can call a free market exchange. And we know about free market exchanges. These are win-win. When adults transfer goods and services, each personally has decided that what the other person has is more valuable for them. this results in what we call a win-win, right? Both parties are better off in a good trade. So we want as many good trades as possible. This is how we raise standards of living. So I completely agree with that statement, but I don't think we should make it more complex than it is. I think we should always go back to the very simple concept that if we simply remove legalized aggression from the law, what will result is exactly the best circumstances to get the goods and services, whether they're healthcare goods and services, whether they're educational services, or whether they're hamburgers. If you want the best good at the best price, you got to have a free market where there's competition and people are working hard to get people to voluntarily reach in their pocket and trade with them.
One more question on this topic. Here is an economist, Ludwig von Mises, a Ukrainian and Austrian economist. He said, what makes wages rise and renders the material conditions of the wage earner more satisfactory is improvement in technological equipment. American wages are higher than wages in other countries because the capital invested per head of the worker is greater, and the plants are thereby in a position to use the most efficient tools and machines. What is called the American way of life is the result of the fact that the United States has put fewer obstacles in the way of saving and capital accumulation than other nations. There is only one way that leads to an improvement of the standard of living for the wage earning masses: the increase in the amount of capital invested. What are your final thoughts on, if we have lower prices and higher incomes, why should I support Marc Victor for Senate if I want a higher wage for myself?
Well, I, of course, completely agree with what von Mises said in that statement. But you could have quoted many other free market economists as well who say very similar things. Look, it's what we know, right? It's exactly what we just talked about, which is that in the free market, people decide for themselves what to value. I don't know what's best for you. You don't know what's best for me. Sometimes we don't know what's best for ourselves, but we're in the best position to make that judgment. And so creating the conditions, right? It's like kind of growing a plant. We don't actually grow the plant. What we do is we create the conditions. We make sure the soil is right. We make sure there's water. We make sure there's minerals. So it's the same with an economy. What we need to do is not judge what we think people want for themselves. What we should do is create the conditions for free men and women, competent adults, to make the decisions for themselves. And then they can decide whether they're getting enough value for the dollars that they're spending. Look, we've seen this over and over again. We can actually take a look at some objective evidence. Countries that do a better job of letting people trade and start businesses in venture capital, they have higher standards of living. You can look all over the world. That's the reason the United States has grown into the superpower it did. It's not for any reason other than we've done a better job of creating a more free society than other places. When you look around the world and you see an economy like Singapore or Hong Kong, underneath that, what you'll find is a more free market where people are free to invest. Property rights are protected, right? That's why people invest, if they feel like their money and property will be secure. So in a nutshell, we need to create the proper conditions, which are private property rights. They need to be protected and defined, and no aggression, right? Aggression should always be against the law. If we can get those two things done, we're going to raise standards of living in a way never seen before on the planet Earth. That's exactly what we need to do. If optimizing human happiness and well-being is on your radar as something that you want to get done, it is certainly on mine. That's the only way to get it done.
Aside from politicians being one of the biggest promoters of aggression, you also have small-scale gang members. The media is up there with who is convincing people to justify very large states. Michael Malice said, "The battle is won when the average American regards a corporate journalist exactly as they regard a tobacco executive." Any ideas on how we fight the media if we want to have a live and let live society?
Well, I don't want to fight the media. What I want to do is get the media. I mean, look, the media, like other businesses, provides a product that they see that people want. Right now, people want to hear news that they agree with. That's why they're in echo chambers, right? That's why they either watch Fox every night or they watch CNN or MSNBC every night, because that's what they want. They want biased news. When we as a people stand up and say, you know what? I want unbiased news. Instead of two talking heads who take the same exact position on an issue, I'd like to see two people diametrically opposed on a position, well-educated people who understand the issue, who are in sharp disagreement, who can have a rational conversation about an issue. Until we, as consumers of news, demand real unbiased news, we're never going to get that. Right now, we're demanding echo chambers. And so that's what we're getting, unfortunately. This isn't something the government can fix. This is something we got to fix. It's exactly like the problems with parenting. You can't pass a law that says everybody must be a good parent or everybody must be a virtuous citizen. We got to take control of this if we want to live in a virtuous society, if we want to live in a place that's got news that's unbiased, that delivers it, calling balls and strikes, if you will. We got to demand that. And then when the market gives us that, we need to support that.
Yes. Excellent. Odyssey.com. Those are the people taking on big tech, and Attorneys for Freedom. Those are the attorneys taking it to the state. What is your favorite book that you've ever read?
Well, this is an easy one for me, although I have many favorite books, but the number one favorite book I've ever read is actually The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People by Stephen Covey. It's not a political book at all. It's a book about sort of personal improvement. I think it's such an important book that I have, for the past many years, shut down my law firm at least one day a year, taking everybody to an offsite location. And we've talked about that book all day long. Everybody who works for me at the Attorneys for Freedom law firm has to read that book. I run my law firm off of the exact same principles in that book. They are actually the same principles that apply in the Live and Let Live movement as well. Indeed, I'm writing a book to support that movement. And in it, I have a chapter about the 7 habits of highly effective people. So yeah, definitely. I think everybody should read that book. It's not to say I agree with everything he said in that book, but this is a very, very fine book, in my opinion, with, if not obvious, very excellent advice put in a way that makes a lot of sense for the average person.
You've had a number of high-profile cases. I know you were involved in the Daniel Schaefer case, in the Stephen Anderson case. Out of all the cases you've tried, do you have a favorite that you really learned a valuable lesson from, or you really felt like you were making a change for the better?
Yeah, frankly, the Elizabeth Johnson trial, otherwise known as the Baby Gabriel case, was an interesting experience for me. This was one that was televised live on national TV, and people didn't like Elizabeth. They were upset that I was defending her. I got death threats from people. And we had a very sort of technical legal defense in that case. The jury, I knew, wouldn't like her. And so it was quite a challenge to try that case. But, as a criminal defense lawyer, I'm very, very committed to the notion that before the government puts anybody in a cage, no matter how vile and horrible the allegations are, this is the hard work of preserving a free society. You got to have people in the trenches. We call them criminal defense lawyers, making sure that the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed before the government puts someone in a cage. And in that case, really, I had the honor of representing somebody who was absolutely hated by the general population. And my job was to make sure she got a fair trial, which is what I did. And we got a very good result from the jury. So it was a good challenge for me as a criminal defense lawyer. It was difficult personally, just because of all the sort of hate mail and emails that I received from people, just simply because I was doing my constitutional duty of making sure that she received due process in a free country before she's put in a cage. So anyways, yeah, that was a really fun trial, but there are many trials, in my career that have had different aspects that I've loved, but I especially like defending people when everybody else is so upset with that person. So I can be the person standing between sort of a lynch mob in a fair trial on the other side. That's the hard work of maintaining a free society.
a lot of people might say, I like the ideas of live and let live. You and I agree on a lot. However, the Libertarian Party does not have a chance at winning. Blake Masters does have a shot at defeating Mark Kelly. And by you running, you're taking away votes from Mr. Masters. How do you respond?
Well, the last time I ran for United States Senate, I got grief from people who said, "Hey, Mark, you're going to take votes away from Jeff Flake, and you're going to allow Rich Carmona to get elected, the Democrat." And I listened to some of those voices, and I probably went a little easier than I could have on Jeff Flake when I got into the debate with him. But as things went, Flake got elected, did his time, and left. And of course, very little to nothing changed. We need real change in our country. There's not one person getting elected that's going to make this happen. We need a real revolution in the thoughts and minds of people. So it's not about getting people elected. It's about getting the message out to win hearts and minds. If I get elected to the United States Senate, my primary mission will be to win more hearts and minds for the live and let live position. I'll run for president probably at the very first opportunity. My major mission, if elected there, will be exactly the same thing. When we have enough people who have in their hearts and minds the ideas in the live and let live movement, not only will we get it done, we'll make sure it stays done, right? Because this is the kind of thing that once we get people understanding what we're saying, this is a way of life. It's a new world view that we need people to adopt so we can move forward and not destroy ourselves, frankly, with the coming technology. We got very, very serious existential threats that we need to get our brains around. We need to unite around some basic ideas about aggression before we can get anything done. I would say don't waste your vote on anybody else who's going to keep doing the same things we've been doing for decade after decade after decade. If you really want to make a real change, if you want to get something started on a global basis that we need to get done, you should support live and let live candidates, no matter what party they're from.
Many people who you want to convince will say this philosophy talks a lot about things like taxation, money, property rights. It's a very shallow materialist philosophy. I care about human rights and actual human well-being. What do you say to that mindset?
Well, I say absolutely not true. In fact, if people are interested in what live and let live is about, one of the very first things they hear is about the moral principle. Just because we don't think it should be in the law doesn't mean we don't feel very strongly about it. I mean, our stated goals with the moral principle are to optimize human happiness and well-being and minimize suffering. So I don't know what more bold statement we could possibly make to sort of undercut this sort of criticism about being superficial. What we are saying is that what we can mandate, there's a minimum standard of conduct, that's don't be an aggressor. And we can't violate that just because we want to get something done that we think should be done, right? Like helping those less fortunate. If we violate the aggression rule to accomplish some other goal, we've overthrown everything we're about. And now other people who have different agendas will say, well, heck, if you guys are violating the don't be an aggressor rule, so will we. Everybody's got different ideas about different priorities and things they want to get done. So that's what I say to people. The cost of admission, if you really want to achieve a free and peaceful world, the cost of admission is the answer to the question, are you big enough to take even your own moral views out of the law? If you're not, that's okay, but stop talking about being for a free society. You're just for imposing your way of life on everybody else. And it may be a way of life I tend to agree with, but I don't want to force my way of life on other people. I want to tell them they can't be aggressors. They can't force their way of life on other people either. But I want people to be free to both define and pursue what makes them happy.
One of the main things that will get freedom advocates, including myself, this is one of the biggest things I struggle with, is if my idea is absolute freedom of self-ownership, peace, love, voluntary exchange, rights to contract. If I don't occupy this position of, let's call it state power or media power, someone else will. We see this on the world scale as well. We might not like NATO expanding, But the alternative is China expanding or Russia expanding. So even if terrible things happen, we, the good people, have to be someone we don't want to be so we can be the people we want to be. What do you say to that?
Well, I think there are two parts there. I think we do need to occupy the positions of power. I mean, one of the rules of the world is he who has the biggest gun makes the rule, whether we like it or not. We are subject to rules now made by other people we don't agree with. And so when there's enough of us to start making the rules, right? When there's enough of people who want peace and freedom and we can make the rules, then we will make the rules. Some people won't like the rules. These are the people who aggress against others, right? The thief might say, hey, you know, I don't agree not to aggress against others. To him, we say back, sorry, we don't need your agreement here. We're gonna tell you you can't aggress whether you like it or not. So it's true that we do need to occupy important positions of power in the world. That's the point of the movement, so we can get enough people to make the rules. However, it doesn't mean we need to compromise anything about what we're saying. I certainly am not interested in compromising any of my views. I've lived my life and do live my life on a daily basis in a way that I don't aggress against anybody. I have no need to aggress against anybody. Anything I get through voluntary trade and persuasion, and to convince people to do deals with me. I don't need to force anybody into anything. I don't think you need to do this either, nor do I think corporations or the government should be allowed to engage in aggression for any purpose at all. So I think we need to draw the line right there. Nobody gets to aggress against another person, even to bring about results that we like.
Now, why is it that freedom and freedom from aggression specifically is your highest value as opposed to increasing GDP or just having an orderly society where, look, even if you take half my income, I at least know that there's a state out there that's going to slam down most of the bad guys? Why is freedom seem to be your highest value?
Well, and if you define freedom as the absence of coercion or aggression, if you will, well, this overthrows everything, right? If somebody's aggressing against you, that you can't do anything. If somebody takes you and throws you in a cage and takes your money, there's nothing left for you to make decisions about. So this is sort of the primary basic rule that we should have in terms of how we interact with each other. If you and I were at war, say we were in different tribes and forever we're raping and stealing and pillaging and doing horrible things to each other, you might imagine the very first rule we would agree on is not to aggress. I would say, Keith, how about you? Look, you don't take my stuff. You don't hit me. I won't take your stuff. I won't hit you. If we can't get that rule done first, whatever other rule we come up with is subject to being aggressed out of existence. So we have to get that rule done before anything else. The good news is we don't have to sacrifice on GDP or anything else here, because it just so happens that if you adopt the rule against aggression in all cases, this is exactly the thing that needs to be done to raise standards of living, to raise gross domestic product, to increase productivity, to increase happiness and well-being, to allow scientists to do science, to allow people to venture money to start new businesses and hire people to create wealth. So without this rule, without getting a non-aggression rule, without having property rights defined and protected, it overthrows any other rule you might make. Think about the rules in the Ukraine right now, right? Russia is aggressing against the Ukraine. It doesn't matter what the Ukrainian rules are at the moment, because Russia is aggressing and bombing cities. And so you got to stop aggression before you can get anything else done.
Certainly. A lot of people will say that when you have a monopoly in an industry, when there's one seller, you will get higher costs and lower quality than you otherwise would under free competition. Yet a lot of people advocate the state monopolizing the currency and monopolizing compulsorily funded education and a slew of other things. One of the big things is arbitration. So when two people have a dispute, the state is often seen, government's often seen as the ultimate decision maker. They get to call. So even if I have a rule, work for me for $1 an hour and you agree to that, well, the state says, no, we actually get the final say, and here's the wage you have to be paid. Do you know of any private arbitration that exists that will allow people to settle their disputes without involving government and their monopoly?
Well, this is something that happens every day, right? Many contracts already have private arbitration clauses. I've arbitrated matters. So it's easy. You could appoint anybody to be an arbitrator in a case as long as they're willing to do it and by whatever rules the people have decided. So that's not the problem. We certainly have in the market people willing to do private arbitration. The problem is, as you identified, when the government comes in and says, sorry, we're not going to let you contract for that hourly raise, even though the seller, let's just take the employer here, says, I got a job, I'm willing to pay it. And then the employee says, I got labor, I'm willing to sell it for this amount. And they made an agreement. When the government comes in and says, sorry, we, and to put a finer tip on it, by force, by aggressing, are going to prevent this type of a transaction, I would identify that as exactly the kind of aggression we need to abolish. So we're not going to get things done as long as there's aggression going on. And to the extent there is aggression, like in the area you just pointed out, in the area of employment law, there are lots of aggression that the government has said you have to do it our way or the highway. We should abolish all that. We should let people, as long as it's a fair transaction, right? If there's coercion in the transaction or something like that, then the rule is violated there. But if it's an arm's length transaction between competent adults, they should be able to agree on anything that they want to agree on that involves their bodies, property, money, and time, period.
Abortion is no different than murder. How do you respond?
Well, to be fair, abortion is a very difficult question. When we talk about murder, we're always talking about the victim who everybody agrees is entitled to what I would say protection of the legal principle. When we're talking about abortion, we have reasonable minds that disagree. To say it more precisely, and to put it in live and let live terms, some people think that from the moment of conception, the unborn baby is entitled to the protection of the legal principle, and that an abortion, therefore, would be an aggression against the unborn baby. Other people think that later on, at the point of viability, maybe, is where the protection of the legal principle applies. Therefore, abortion after that time becomes an aggression that's illegal. So this is an area, to be fair, look, we've been debating this for quite some time now. Reasonable minds who are entirely committed to the legal principle here can completely disagree. Then not just abortion, there are many other questions, like, for example, animal rights is one of those questions. I said earlier, nobody gets to create a substantial risk of harm to another person. But exactly where that point is another place where reasonable minds can disagree. So what we say, when we reach a situation where reasonable minds can disagree about how the legal principle applies, what we do is we resolve this by letting the local smallest jurisdiction make that decision. And the reason for that is people aren't entitled to make their own judgments about how the legal principle applies, right? This would result in everybody being a judge in their own case, right? You would get to decide if you violated the principle. I would get to decide if I violated the principle. And so what people are actually entitled to is a reasonable construction of that principle, not their personal, but a reasonable construction. And so in the case of abortion, like several others, there are more than one reasonable construction. We say, let the lowest level community. And what I mean by that is the city and the town level, not even the state level. So how does this play out in abortion? Well, maybe Mesa and Gilbert decide abortion is illegal from the moment of conception, and Tempe and Chandler decide, no, abortion becomes illegal after the point of viability. And then we'll let the market decide. People can decide where they want to live. People can decide where they want to conduct their business, and rules can be affected. This is the best way to get what we like to call a laboratory of small communities, making judgments about what the best way is to handle this. And it's also a very low transaction cost For people who may want to move out, say, look, I really don't like that rule. I'm leaving. I'm moving out of that community. They don't have to lose their job or give up their friends to move to another country. They just move to the next town, and we let the market decide from there. Is it a perfect resolution? No. And we'll never get a perfect resolution because people disagree on how this applies. But we got to get past it. And for the sake of peace and freedom, this is a good way to get past it by putting it in the local community, letting them decide, and then let the market deal with it from there.
Assume that you were the judge in an abortion case. Would you treat abortion like you would treat a murderer?
Well, it depends on what jurisdiction I was a judge in. If I was a jurisdiction in a if I was a judge in a jurisdiction where they had opted for the reasonable construction that says abortion is outlawed from the moment of conception, well, then I would proceed with that rule. That might be a place I may not choose to be a judge if I don't like that rule. But if I was in a different jurisdiction, then I would apply that rule. The judge's job is not to make the law. The judge's job is to interpret the law and be a judge about whether or not the law has been violated, and then go from there. That's the judicial function. So it really is a question of, it's not about what my personal view is. It's about, if I was a judge in that jurisdiction, which reasonable construction of the legal principle is at work there. And that's what I would apply. And if I didn't want to apply it because it violates my personal views, then I wouldn't take a job being a judge in that jurisdiction.
But I think it's important that we still have a position regardless of jurisdiction. Like if I told you I was a rapist, but it was in Tucson and that's a different jurisdiction, or if I just told you I was a kidnapper, you wouldn't say in what geographical area do you kidnap? I'd have to check the jurisdiction. It's okay for us to say murder, rape, theft, abortion, breach of contract. These things are inherently wrong in the live and let live movement. Do you have any final words on, 60 million abortions since Roe v. Wade. So it's not like I'm, picking some, lifeboat scenario here. I think it's really something that people care about.
Yeah, sure it is. But, in the case of, say, kidnapping, for example, reasonable minds are not in disagreement about what a kidnapping is. You have a right to not be taken against your will and moved. And so that's not based on the jurisdiction, right? We can say everywhere that's an aggression. In the case of abortion, because we have a situation where reasonable minds disagree about how the legal principle applies, right? Some places will say you're not entitled to that protection until you hit a certain point of viability. Then that is not considered a murder in that jurisdiction. So to make a general statement that this is sort of implies that we have the same rule across all jurisdictions. So while we can say murder does violate the live and let live legal principle, whether an abortion from the moment of conception qualifies as a murder is a function of what the jurisdiction says in terms of when the legal principle applies.
What is the most burdensome regulation you as a small business owner have had to face?
I would say taxes, certainly. Anytime you're sort of you're just simply taking money from people or businesses, and now the overall tax burden, if you calculate everything up, it's certainly about 50% at least. It's hard to imagine any regulation that could be as burdensome as just simply taking 50% of your money right off the top. So I would say taxation is a huge draw, because that 50% of the money now doesn't travel through voluntary decision making. It travels through involuntary decision making, which means we're going to get inefficient decisions on where that money goes. So this, by definition, puts inefficiency in the economy as to 50% of the flow of dollars. So I would say, if you had me identify a real quick one, I would say it's certainly that one. Although there are other areas of the economy. Take the marijuana trade was completely pushed underground by a bunch of laws that banned transactions that were not aggression. Now this is coming back out of the black market and into the legal market. And as a result, we're realizing millions and millions of dollars in revenue above the table now, which, by the way, shouldn't be taxed either. So that industry as well suffers from the same burdensome taxation that every other industry. But I think if we could just get to a real free market where dollars, the goal here should be every dollar, when it changes hands as a result of a voluntary transaction, not an involuntary transaction.
What is the biggest misconception that the population has about lawyers?
I think there's a lot of misconceptions. Actually, I'm very proud to be a lawyer. This doesn't mean that all lawyers are good. I think, like every other profession, there are good and bad. I think that the biggest misconception, I think, is that lawyers lie a lot or something like that. And I'm just telling you the truth here. In my 28 years of working as a lawyer, I can think of very few, if any, occasions where some lawyer has lied to me about anything. In fact, we have very clear ethics rules that flat prohibit that. And the state bar does enforce this and should enforce this, I think. If the state bar is going to be a relevant organization, which it is at the moment. We could also do this privately as well. But I think that if you're interested in a civilized society, what that means is we got to get the laws right, which means that lawyers have a very, very, very important job. We're the ones that sort of administer the civil and criminal justice system. And if you got that messed up, you're not going to get a free society going under any circumstances. So I think this is a very critical, important function of a free society. We got to have our laws straight. That's what Live and Let Live is about. We're saying all the laws should be in harmony with this idea that aggression is wrong.
Definitely. We have the long-term goal of convincing the population to embrace this live and let live concept. Do whatever you want so long as you don't initiate fraud or aggression against a peaceful person. Are there any short-term goals that we could have besides electing you as senator? Is there anything the people listening today can do? Is it agorism? Is it try to secede? Is it try to, engage in private arbitration as much as possible? What can we do today or within the short term while we wait for the long-term goal to come to fruition?
Well, what I tell everybody is step one, own the message, right? Check out Live and Let Live. Go to liveandletlive.org and really understand what it is that we're saying. That's what we mean by own the message. The second thing we say is live the message. Be a leader. Don't just talk about being a good human. Actually, be a good human. Say, look, I'm a live and let live person. Here's me doing the kinds of things I'm espousing, not just espousing those things. Actually live the message. And then as a third thing, people should join the movement. This is a very low transaction cost thing that people can do. Go to the liveandletlive.org website, check the box that says you agree with the Live and Let Live principles, put your email address in there, put your name on the growing list of names of people who say, I support what the Live and Let Live movement is about. When we get enough people to have enough clout, we'll use that clout to get things done. What this means is politicians may say, you know what, there's a big voting block out there of live and let livers, just like they do with the NRA, for example, and maybe they'll vote in ways consistent with the things that we're in favor of. Another option is that they don't, and maybe people in the Live and Let Live movement run for office and displace those other politicians who refuse to kind of get with the program. And the third option is, look, we got to have a thought revolution. This is the way the American Revolution was first seen, as a thought revolution. It wasn't a military issue. It was a revolution in thinking. That's exactly what we need. So be an example of that. Live that world view that aggression is wrong, and be a mouthpiece for the movement. Spread it around. Tell people we're in a race against those who would aggress, right? To win the world. We are on the non-aggression side. I think the vast majority of people are on our side. They need to understand the message before they can sort of line up with what it is we're promoting.
Do you have a favorite charity that's not Live and Let Live or the Libertarian Institute? Do you have a favorite charity?
Well, of course, Live and Let Live is my favorite charity at the moment. But before that, and this is just a personal preference, I don't claim any great wisdom here, but I've sent my money to Africa because I think that the opportunities, I think sort of the suffering there is huge, and the opportunities to get out of that suffering are very scant. And so I send money there. I also have sent money, and still do, to Zuhdi Jasser's organization. He is pushing a Muslim reform movement. The name of his movement actually escapes me, but people could Google Zuhdi Jasser. I think it's ZUDHIJASSER. And so this is a movement I've supported over the years. Also, I support the Cato Institute. I think that they do a lot of good work at Cato. And I think getting the word out about a free society and freedom and across lots of different issues is very important as well.
Thanks to everyone for watching the Don't Tread on Anyone podcast and the Libertarian Institute. Mr. Victor, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks, brother. I appreciate being on your show again.